We are ready. Thank you very much, Andrew, for being here. We will begin the presentation. First, let me introduce you to the group. We'll be having your presentation, of course, in English. And to the group, this is Andrew Kay. He's a TOC expert and TOC-FE facilitator. He is working continuously to improve his skills and to help companies around even the world with the help of TOC-FE and the TOC consulting. And I met him for the first time, I think, in Germany in a TOC ICO conference. And I think that's when he began also his involvement with TOC-FE strongly. So he's been working a lot with CCPM. And as I told you guys, we wanted to connect with experts around the world that can give you an insight of CCPM and their experience. So Andrew Kay, thank you very much for being here. I pass on the mics to you, and we can go.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel, and it's my pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be able to share with you some of my experiences implementing CCPM into a range of different organizations. And so we'll go and do some case studies. So let's start, because we only have a limited amount of time and I've packed a lot into these slides. So Daniel, if you don't mind, give me a prompt when I need to allow time for you for questions and answers. So I don't want to get too carried away, so just let me know at a certain point in time how I'm tracking. I have time here, but just let me know.
Okay.
So let's start. Okay, so we've done the introduction. So let's just quickly look at the nature of projects. You might see a common theme in my slides. It's all to do with elephants. It's a fine balancing act between achieving scope, schedule, and budget. And all the while, underneath, we have dependent events, statistical variation, and human behavior. All those things conspire to make it difficult to achieve all those things at the top, those three goals of projects. So we are, with CCPM, we have much better understanding now how to manage this successfully. So I won't go into these. These are some examples from my part of the world of projects that have gone off the rails very quickly, extraordinary budget overruns and time overruns because they're using traditional methods. Just day before yesterday, I had a text message with a colleague of mine, a CCPM expert, also here in Sydney. He said, let's go for a coffee. And I said, yeah, let's organize that. And he said, look, I just reviewed a project schedule. This is what was on our in our phone message bank. He said he reviewed a project with a client. It was a $70 million project over 2 years. And when he applied CCPM and did a project network, it showed to be 7 months late. TOC people tend to be very cheeky, so they ask questions, and he asked me, what do you think they did? So in the blue, I said first, they probably would have changed the date. But if not, then they would cut scope. And if that wasn't feasible, they'd ask for more money. Easy if the client is the government. If not, then probably they would have to take a cut to their profit. Or D, stick their head in the sand. Maybe the problem will resolve itself downstream. His answer was D is correct. He said that they would just allow the problem to resolve itself downstream. The liquidated damages for being late were insignificant. So they were not going to change the due date or the scope or the budget. They were just, if they were running late, pay the extra penalty, which was minuscule compared to the money that they were going to make. What Robert said to me was that he used the network building process we call it an NCN, it's a great TOC method. I have actually used this, and I will show you how I use this in a big organization to demonstrate exactly the same thing. So we'll move on. As you know, the history of project management has traveled over more than 150 years. And it's only since 1997, 20 years ago, that CCPM came onto the scene, but through Ellie Goldratt. So a majority of people are still stuck on that orange arrow between CPM and PERT. So when we're implementing CCPM, we're talking about a paradigm shift. Those that switch over very quickly get very rapid results with CCPM. And the question for me as a practitioner for now nearly 17 years is, why do we keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results? And Albert Einstein wrote that quote, and he also wrote, well, we can't solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So it's what to change to, and how to cause the change. This is very important in transitioning to a CCPM environment and throughput world thinking, the TOC way of thinking. And one thing that I observe is that it is very, very difficult to transition to CCPM. An example here is that we put protection for the whole project, not for the individual tasks. That's one of the features of CCPM. And why is it so difficult to change? It's not so much about accepting the new, but letting go of the old. And when you are implementing CCPM, this is really, really significant. You are bringing people, transferring them from an old way of thinking to a new way of thinking, and making them see this, have the logic, and feel safe in the process. And as we know, and I know that you've been studying the subject of critical chain, essentially the difference is that critical path is push methodology. You start on the left and push down and to the right, whereas critical chain starts with the end in mind and works backwards as a pull methodology, using necessity logic. Trying to explain that in words to people has its limitations, but we do manage. But the next slide captures everything, and when they show this slide, they get it. Somehow or other, the image of stampeding elephants representing projects going through a narrow portal resonates with them, and they'd much rather see the elephants on the right side as being their projects coming through than the ones on the left side. The left side is very dangerous. It's life-threatening, and people in project environments will tell you that they sometimes feel that their lives are threatened. So let's jump onto some case studies. This was a project I worked on with a bunch of TOC guys in New Zealand, and this was a coordination, synchronization between CCPM and drum buffer rope, which is the operations solution for, say, manufacturing. So they made these heavy, large-scale industrial freeze-dry equipment. They are an export internationally. They're one of few manufacturers with the technology and the know-how. And if you see the results before and after with CCPM, now these are long lead time projects, but from 5 in 20 months for one model, they went to 7 in 9 months with an increase in output of 211%. And the other machines, the 2 other models, were 4 in 20 months, and they were now cut the lead time by 100%, 4 in 10 months. So they had consistent, consecutive years of record profits. And I used to follow up with that company, and every time I would go to New Zealand, they were opening up bottles of champagne, celebrating. So I always managed to get a glass of champagne when I arrived because they were consistently making record profits. It was great fun to be with them, and it transformed their organization. Another New Zealand's company is a steel, structural steel manufacturer. They had lots of missed due dates. There was a lot of expediting, very expensive. And we also found that they operated in silos, so limited communication between departments. So what we did, again, was CCPM, coupled with drum buffer rope in the manufacturing of the actual steel beams. In this client, we applied CCPM and broke down the construction into phases and then staggered the phases so that we avoided a lot of the bad multitasking that was happening back in their on their operation site. So this company, it took a little bit longer to get them going. So in 2003, their turnover was 11.5 million. And within 2 years, in less than 2 years, they went to $21 million turnover. Partly also driven by the state of the economy, because we also have to understand that demand has to be there. And at this time, the economy had started to pick up, so they were able to capitalize on that. Here is a sample from a company called Electrolux and domestic refrigeration in Australia. We did a lot of work in this company. In CCPM was only one part of this, but we more than doubled the rate of completion of new model design in their R&D projects. So they were able to turn around new model development and new technologies in half the time. There is a remarkable situation for what they customize their models for export. They have to change a number of things if they're going to a different country with different power ratings and so on. So we have 240 volts here, and if they go to 110 volts, they have to change circuitry and that. It used to take 28 days. We use CCPM, and now it's only 36 hours. And I'm showing you a picture here. We did this manually, no software. And on that board there, you can see a white, if I can get my mouse to work, my pointer. Here we go. This here is the critical chain, and these are the feeding chains with a feeding buffer. The project NCN, the project network, was all done using Post-it notes back in those days. Here's an example of an R&D project, and you can see, I'll try and get my mouse to work. And it's not playing, but there is a white center line there, and then you can see several integration points. And there is, on the left-hand side, 2 sets of magnets. Those sets of magnets are holding strings, and those strings show the current date. Also, we introduced a concept, future risk mitigating strategies. So for each task, we would look at what the task was, what was potentially a risk in that task, and attack that risk before we even started it. So so for instance, in this foul in wrapper line, that's the risk. We would sharpen the tool before it was required to be utilized. So we were looking at downstream ahead, making sure that not only did we have full kit, but part of that process was to avoid problems. One was where a supplier actually said they were closing down, and because of the standards and requirements, they had to go through testing and proofing to find a new, this had a 3-month lead time, so we detected that well in advance. On the right-hand side here, we had several engineers in cost reduction with individual projects. So one engineer here had 3 separate projects running. So we understood the danger of bad multitasking, but they were able to manage these, and they just converted an Excel spreadsheet into representing a CCPM project. So there's a project buffer down here. You'll see a small feeding buffer here, and they did it this way for themselves, and that worked. Let's see. I'll just go back to the results. The cost reduction, they budgeted $2.5 million in direct materials, and they achieved $4.1 million. So they earned an extra $1.5 million by using CCPM just on a very small element of their business. Again, back to New Zealand, worked in a company that built custom homes. They had a long lead time to build homes. They had lots of unhappy customers, very typical for home constructors. They had unhappy subcontractors, all the tradespeople, the one that do the tiling, the flooring, the walls, the painting, all unhappy. There was lots of stress, and they were hardly making profit, if at all. So what we did was an on-site project with CCPM. We put that into the system and taught them how to do this, and you will see that the results, 110 to 120 days to 73 days average, that gave them 30 to 35% more capacity. And if each of these homes is worth 100,000 in profit, that's increasing their bottom line quite significantly. Another thing is in construction, they get progress payments, and they were very unreliable. And for cash flow for this type of business, it's very important to be reliable. And so they were able to achieve that. So you can read this later, but one thing was important to me is that we were able to cut the 30% out of the lead time for building homes. So you're building them in less time, but at the same time, the quality went up to the extent that they won 2 national awards for quality in the prestige category of homes. So that's fascinating. They didn't cut scope. They actually improved the quality and won these awards. So that's quite something. Now, I'm showing you this. This is, again, a manual. It's not using software. We did this all manually, running a generic template for a home and using strings to show you the progress for each individual project. And this is the buffer, the generic buffer, and we can actually see where the, and this is when we started, so it was a mess, and some were already past their due date. We were able to rescue 3 of the others and bring 2 actually in on time. You will see that these little markings here, this is when the money, the progress payments would come into their system, and that was now more reliable. You can see the feeding buffers, and we have these little long arrows here. This is where we had to purchase something, and we needed, it's a long lead time. We had to allow sufficient time to purchase something for it to arrive where there was an integration point, something like that. There's a lot more to it than this, but that's just to give you a flavor. Here is a company that, my first company that I used software. This was with Exapron. This is a so I'm under non-disclosure agreement, so I can't show you their details, but the results were, they're working in hydrogen, converting water, separating the hydrogen and oxygen molecule to produce pure hydrogen as a clean energy project. It's very, very disruptive technology, and is potentially going to transform, well, you hear about electric cars. Well, potentially this fuel could be used for driving normal combustion engine with hydrogen, and they're on the way to doing this at an industrial level. So we were able to reduce the time to actually provide lab tests to actually achieve the results that they were looking for. They built a factory. The factory is built specifically to test and develop the commercialization of their prototypes. That was on time or in less time. And I was saying, using CCPM hands-free, they don't need me anymore. They're all smart guys. They're all from innovation centers with universities, commercial, and a lot of PhD guys and so on. So they're all smart cookies. I only stay in touch once in a while. And you can see them using, so there's Exapron on the screen on the left. That's me sitting on the left there as well. And they're using Post-it notes, because this was the very first edition of Exapron, and we were struggling with using because of their security firewalls. Sometimes Exapron was a little bit unstable, and so they decided to go with the Post-it notes and then convert it in the one go. All that is now behind us. That doesn't not a problem. Am I going too fast? Are you okay there, Daniel?
Okay, so far so good. It just the slides take a little longer to transition.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. So just let me know if I'm flicking too fast. So if you remember the little comment from my colleague using the messenger on my iPhone, well, this is a similar situation in this. This is the Australian Curriculum Assessment Reporting Authority, and their mission is to convert national testing for children from grade 3, grade 5, grade 7, and grade 9, and put them onto from pencil and paper testing to online. And the reason for this is because it takes 6 to 9 months for all the papers to be marked, and then the information fed back to the schools and to the children. That lag was too long for any significant decision making to help change methods in teaching. So I'm working in this organization, and they say you are not allowed to mention projects, and we want you to address these 5 questions. So what are the critical resources? How do I manage multitasking? What are my priorities? How do I get simple visual status of the program? And how can I see in the immediate future, not just the long distance, but in the next 30, 60, 90 days. So I'm not allowed to use projects. These were academics, and they had disaster with software and other people trying to sell them project management. So I had to go under the radar, and they were desperate, and I really felt for the people, because I've never seen this before. This is in their lunch area. They say, overworked at Akara, know your right to refuse work. These people were being burnt out, and they needed help. So I was there and had to avoid using the word project, so I developed the term workflow and did a presentation, and they brought me in, and we started working with Post-it notes. And it turned out, and what you're seeing here looks horrendous. It's because we've merged several projects together, and they wanted to use the Post-it notes, and we saw that this was getting very unwieldy, very complicated. So in the background, I was using Exapron. Before I get there, this is what it looked like once we converted to CCPM. Again, it's the white is the critical chain. We have a string showing the current date. You can see that this project, when we started, was already the project buffer was already consumed. We slide that back, and we're already here. So there was no spare time. This is how much stress they were already under. They started the project, and it wasn't late, but they had no buffer. So scary for them. So here's another example. And we use a timeline at the very top and a date line that's just a piece of string, and it flows through the individual tasks. They didn't show the connecting arrows on this diagram. It's just a magnetic strips on whiteboard. This organization, the people in there were really struggling on a day-to-day basis just to get work done. Very early on, we had a success. They finished early. They delivered early. This is my little diagram here. They're all standing around looking gloomy, and I said, "Come on, guys, you can celebrate." They weren't used to that. They'd not actually achieved a point, and they've lost the habit of celebrating. So we had to change that aspect so they could celebrate. It was quite remarkable. In the background, what I was using Exapron, and they said, "Wow, what is that? Can we have it also?" I trust that you know Exapron. It's just a cloud-based software which I use, and I think you mentioned, Daniel, that they're familiar with Exapron. They've been trialing Exapron.
That's correct.
So this is what I introduced without actually introducing it. I just let them see me playing around with it, putting this stuff in there, and they said, "We want it," and they signed up the very next day. It sped up the planning very quickly and delivered some very unexpected news. And that news, so here we are, and you can see some of the gloomy faces. The news is that they thought they only had 6 projects. We uncovered 36 projects. And we've discovered that the timelines would not fit into the promised delivery date, assuming that they had all the resources. They needed to check, so Exapron kindly provided financial reports, and we found that there was only 50% of the budget available to do the work. And not only that, only 50% of the resources. So they had to go back to the board, and the board said, "Okay, we are not going to give you more resources or more money. We're going to suspend the project." And then they came back and said, "We're going to cut the budget further and outsource to other providers." They privatized some of the key elements. So it prevented massive failure, but it also meant that some people were they were slowly, by attrition, letting go of staff and outsourcing to provide private suppliers. So it's a big political creature, and I was very sad again that the government and the state governments decided to do that. Whilst I was there, the ICT division said, "We want CCPM," and we worked with CCPM, and those budget cuts also applied to those guys, and you can see we were workshopping some of their projects using CCPM. Again, these were think tanks, and we would use Exapron a little bit later. And in the process, I taught them the logical thinking tools. We ran a management skills workshop, and we would be applying those in the process of implementing CCPM, because they had to decide which projects to keep and which projects to let go. And that often caused conflict. So they were using the conflict diagram, and TRIM here is a software utility that they use. It was a central element, but they were saying it's a bit old, so they were using the conflict cloud. I don't know if you've touched on any of the TP tools, but as an implementer, as a TOC implementer, you need to have that toolkit. Here is a list of projects that they were reviewing to choke the release, so they can stop the bad multitasking that they were doing and start getting results. And they thought that this would help slow down the rate by which they were being cut back in terms of capacity. Okay, this one I presented this case study at an Exapron conference, I can't remember, 2015. I worked with BAE Systems in Australia, and this is a jet training aircraft. It's called a fast jet trainer. or leading fighter. And we're talking about maintenance, repair, overhaul environment. Oops, go back. The BAE, their customer was the Royal Australian Air Force. Their base was on the east coast, just north of where I live in Sydney, and we also worked with the Perth base. They came over to learn CCPM. At this time, I wrote this presentation. They had 6 out of 6 first time around, meaning we implemented, this is a rapid implementation. All the others were reasonably rapid, but this was really quick. 8 days to fully install and have operational CCPM. And it took only 2 weeks to deliver the first results, and the first 6 aircraft were all on time in accordance with the program. This is the first time this has happened since they started with the RAAF in 1987 when they won the contract. There were 1 or 2 jets that came in with 43% less time, with 2 aircraft delivered to the customer 4 weeks early. The customer says, well, actually, where did we put the airplane? And one of those jets had a 23% scope increase. So CCPM really drove a shortening of the maintenance and repair overhaul cycle, although these were the easy level of maintenance. We use Exapron from day one. From what I understand, now it's 30 out of 30 jets. This was about the last time I was talking to them is about 12 months ago, and they had 30 out of 30. I won't go into MRO environment. I'm just conscious of the time. But it's very, very complex. You have a lot of kits, you have to pull it apart, you go looking for problems. The deeper the level of maintenance you are going to be doing, you are expecting to have surprises, and there's a lot of variability in the whole environment. So you've got high demand variability, uncertainty in the extent of work that's required, uncertainty of the materials that are required, having availability of those key components. Some of them are very, very expensive, so you don't keep in store things that you may or may not use. It costs a lot. There's a lot of capital expenditure required, and because of the nature of the issues, you can get unpredictable and complex flow paths. So if there's a problem with avionics and that ties in with the wings, then the way to solve the problem may not be the standard way. You have to invent a new way. And in some cases, as the equipment is getting older, you don't necessarily know what to expect. Sometimes the faults occur only in the midlife of that particular piece of equipment, in this case, jets. So we have a lot of uncertainty. We don't know the work content before we start. Try putting that into a normal project environment and we run into a few problems. One of the things that is common in common practice is that they will steal a part from one aircraft and put it onto another to get that one working. So it's called cannibalization, but it's actually a default because the system is not working. To make things a bit more difficult, sometimes the suppliers are unreliable. Always they say, where are my parts? And there could be actual quality issues in those parts themselves. You can't put a person in a jet aircraft and expect the aircraft, you've got to make sure that they can come back down. So we had an environment of multiple projects sharing multiple resources. They had productivity measures that drove everyone to keep busy. So that means they would start many things and not finish many things. So bad multitasking. And another complicating factor is that the Commonwealth had strict regulations and compliance requirements on what they had to do. So it was very, very tough. So they were struggling. They called me, actually, I'll show you a timeline soon. They called me whilst I was about to depart Australia and said, can you come in and talk to us? So But before I go to there, let's just have a look at what a rapid implementation looked like. Now, the person in the top photo with the yellow sleeve is Danny Walsh from Exapron over here, and we are using Exapron from day one. In the beginning, we had half a day executive overview with the 15 people. We started training on day 2 with 33 people. We set up an Exapron account. It took an hour and a half, and I did that with one of the people whilst Danny was talking about the change management process. On day 3, we got the team to be familiarized with Exapron. So day 2 was about the methodology of CCPM. What are the problems that it addresses and how it all hangs together. On day 4, we created the first generic template for the MRO environment for the first type of jet plane, first level of maintenance. And then we commenced the second project template. So each template is a standard, and each one has then the next one and the next one after that has an increasing degree of effort required. On day 4, the team leader for one of the jets was already applying CCPM in the depot. That's remarkable. So we started on day 2 doing the training. On 1, 2, on the 3rd day, he's actually applying the principles to the jet, to one that's already in the depot under maintenance. Day 5, we completed the second generic template. And on day 5, another team leader started, partly because he didn't want to get left behind because the other one already started. By the end of the week, we had 2 jets in execution. That is really, really fast. And I said in my presentation that CCPM helps make jets go faster, not in the air, but on the ground for maintenance. So here's a couple of photos just to show you a little bit. One of the things that was quite extraordinary is that there was a role change in the second week, even partly in the first week. The people from BAE Systems took over. We sat in the background. Danny and I just let them run, and we would only intervene if they were getting off track. So they went in, they brought in, this is really important here, they started scheduling. They created a master schedule for all aircraft for the whole pipeline for 12 to 14 months with both the East Coast and West Coast, with all their jets, the entire squadron. I'm not allowed to say how many there are. And on day 2, they went and developed the 3rd level and then the 4th level generic templates, and we synchronized to the engineering bank shops. One part of, so on the East Coast, they were four days operations and 5 days operations on the West Coast. So we had to normalize that in Exapron, and we played lots and lots of what-if scenarios using the project templates. So we were able to then build a library of known variations, do what-if scenarios on the pipeline, and review, and we were able to review the support function requirements. That's the maintenance repair workshops that did the undercarriage, wings, supply lines, and so on. And we appointed a full kit person as well. So we were able to get a lot of traction with a lot of speed very, very quickly, and partly because the entire company this division of the company were well prepared for what was to come. And I'll talk about that in a moment. They then, actually they started by saying, we don't want software. And I said, well, it's possible, but it's better to have it. And when Danny came on board, they saw the benefit of using the Exapron software. I won't talk about that, but very quick. This is not my project. Sorry, I shouldn't have had this one in here. But Boeing Satellite Division was losing $250 million US a quarter. They had 40 years of being perfectly late. Every satellite they built, every satellite they had built was 100% late. And when they applied CCPM, a 3-year project came in on time and only cost $500 million. So they were able to save significant amounts of money. And they are using still today CCPM. Need to talk to Danny Walsh about that because he was the one who did that. So benefits of CCPM, I won't talk about that, you know all of that. So rapid implementation, here's the secret. There are 2 parts. Part 1, it's all in the preparation. So if you are understanding what are the layers of resistance in TOC, it's what is the problem, the direction, whoops, what is the problem? Let's see if we can go back. Understanding the problem, getting consensus from everyone about the problem. Sorry, my mouse is now working and I didn't expect that. So getting the client ready for the expectation that this is going to happen. We're on a mission and we want to get their headspace that way. So when we start, this is a priority. And we set it up so that when they agree that we're going to start implementation, we have powerful people to remove any obstacles from that implementation. If you don't get results early when you do start, it takes time, then people will lose interest. So we have to be very, very careful and very meticulous about the preparation. If you paint a house, most of the effort in painting a house should be in preparing the surface before you put the coat of paint on. Otherwise, it will look terrible. It's the same with CCPM. We have to treat any implementation of CCPM as a CCPM project. Does that make sense? And we build the network using any of the reservations and negative branches and the intermediate objectives that come up during this introductory phase. So it's a lot to do with preparation. And then part 2 is that we tie each phase together. So there's education, so there's analysis, education, custom solution design, and then installation. We move through those transitions very, very quickly to full effect. We've got to get these early wows, which is, you know, on day 4, we had jets already running on CCPM, and in 2 weeks, we already had results. That's how quick we can move. In TOC 3 practice, we generally can do that in 10 days. Using Exapron, and this is what blew me away, was that we were able to do that now in even less time, 4 to 7 days. This does not mean that they know everything and it's fully internalized. We still have to follow up with that. We can't leave them there. You still have to hold their hand until they say, good, we're fine, you can go away now. And that, we say, is about a 90-day phase, just to taper away and let them be. So this is a slide that shows you the steps that we normally go through and the durations. Stage 6 is where the progress, PUGI starts. It starts at stage 5 and is ongoing, continuous improvement. All the rest is very, very rapid, standard practice. So my experience from hearing other practitioners, they're saying it takes 2 to 3 months to get a solution installed in CCPM. Well, we do it in 10 days, and with Exapron now, it's 5 days. And that's been my experience in Aquahydrex, Bicara, BAE systems. And the other projects with the other companies, it was minimum, it was 10 days and sometimes longer. So we're going to look at some of the hurdles. I'm noticing the time that we've got, so we need to move. So hopefully I'm not going too fast. Knowing the technology or methodology is not the same as knowing how to implement it. It's a big statement. We have to understand that we're introducing a paradigm shift, and we have to understand the cause and effect of the change process as well. There are lots and lots of people we're talking to who live on that orange arrow from that in this critical path method, PERT method, and there are a lot of people who know nothing about project management. So we have to be careful about how we transition them. There are people. So part of the implementer's toolkit is to know the TOC thinking processes, and we use them as required. We don't teach them the tools. We use them as a good tradesman, you would use your own tools. We are working with people invested in the old ways. Whilst they might say, yeah, that looks great, they can't let go of their old ways. So we need to make them feel safe and secure, taking steps into the unknown. This is really, really important. I'll give you an example. In this ACARA organization, it was a real struggle because I had two people who were resisting change significantly because we were exposing a couple of hidden agendas. I was just able to achieve buy-in from one of these critical influencers. He was on board, and I was away for a day. I came back and discovered that this person was absolutely against CCPM because he had an argument by another consultant, an external consultant, with only partial knowledge of how to cause the change. He had a bitter argument, and now there was resistance, and it was a struggle from that time on. So it really, really is important to understand how to implement. We need to expose all stakeholders to the buy-in process. If you leave somebody out, they're not understanding, then it could be quite well that they resist either actively or passively, but there is resistance, and it may cause problems downstream. You want to avoid that. So it's all in the preparation before we start. And this is an insight I learned a long, long time ago, that your project actually starts the moment you are talking with them, before they've even decided to implement CCPM. Your project starts then, and you're working with them to get them into a position where once they agree, then it happens very rapidly. And of paramount importance is your listening. You can miss something important, and then that person may resist and not change down the track. So we need to check with everyone and know everyone what is their thinking. This sounds onerous, but it is necessary. It doesn't take all that long, but it's very, very valuable. Hard to do as a solo practitioner, so always work with a buddy if you can, who understands the process. We also need to make sure that everyone has their say. Extract all the undesirable effects. Get them to say what they think. No blame, but everyone has their say, and we need to have consensus and traverse the layers of resistance carefully. And Daniel can fill you in if he hasn't done so already on what are the layers of resistance. But it's an important process to transitioning to accepting a new direction. The BAE timeline was all about what I've just explained. So they had spoken to me in mid-December. I was actually sitting in a Boeing jet on my way to Germany when the call came in just before takeoff. They told me that they had done several months of study, practiced with what they understood, and did some good work with 2 jets, and it showed that they were happy with the principles. They said, can you come in when you get back from your holidays and your travels and talk to the executive? So we had a big executive meeting, the LIFT program executive overview, and in that discussion they said that we're struggling, we're energized to resolve the current issues, it's determined not to disappoint the customer, so they had a strong and powerful need. And the turning point was that the business improvement coordinator stated that Lean has taken BAE only so far, and it can't do what CCPM can do, which is obvious and necessary to meet on-time delivery requirement for the lead-in fighter program. So that was the time and so I was doing a presentation, and I was presenting to the program manager, who's an ex-fighter pilot who had seen action, and he had his arms folded for right up until this point in time, and he said, okay, if you say that, what's the next steps? And the next steps was then a week and a half later to run a one-day necessary and sufficient CCPM buy-in workshop with 18 cross-functional personnel. So I had to talk to the key stakeholders who it was going to impact. We actually ran the bead game. Daniel, if you remember what that is there, we did that, and they said yes, we want to go ahead. So I introduced then Danny Walsh as being a leading expert in military MRO and Exapron. They sent in a purchase order. You can see how fast this is going. And then within a matter of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we were on deck running the CCPM phases over a 10-day period. We actually did it in 8 days. And then they set up an Exapron account formalizing this. And the first results came in only 2 weeks later. And then a few weeks later, 6 from 6. And towards the end of that year, it was 20 from 20, and then it went to 30 from 30. So that was a timeline. Now this is all about clearing prerequisites, sufficient full kit for an implementer. The project didn't start until March. So what I was doing was making sure I had full kit and I had everyone's head in the right place so that they had their priorities right so that we could get on with it. So part of the process is setting the having the setting so that they will go very quickly, and there are those who can remove any obstacles for going fast. It was money for them, so why not? Some of the tricks of the trade: make sure that if you expose buffers, that the upper management say, well, that we can discard that now that you've exposed it. Buffers are part of your project. They cannot dispose of them. It's tricky. It shows that they don't understand. It means they have to have their education. So tread carefully when you expose that. They do need to understand. Management, and I've seen this where it has been tried, and I step in. Management cannot use buffer penetration as a way to punish or reprimand people. Just because you are going towards the end, it doesn't mean that they're not trying. We are using aggressive estimates. You must not punish late task completion. Elox, it's Electrolux example, there were 2 or 3 people where the general manager jumped down their throats because some of their tasks were running behind schedule, but the schedule is an aggressive schedule. So I had to take the general manager, and he attended all the workshops. I said, you need to lighten up. These guys are not going to show up if you do that, if you continue to do that. So very, very important. This is not at a personal level. Of course, if there is someone not performing continually, then re-educate. But do not use any of this for pointing fingers and blame. Equally important is that managers must positively reinforce the effort and the right behaviors from the very start. Give all the encouragement you can, because they are working in a new space, new behaviors. They need to know that they're supported. I hope that makes sense. Now, another thing is that management, typically in old project environments, traditional project environments, management adds their own safety to the project until it gets to the boardroom or the executive level where they know it's going to be chopped back. So at least they're protecting their project, their people. So we can't do that in CCPM. So we only use the tasks and the task estimates given by the task managers and subject matter experts. So we don't add extra layers of buffers. As you know, we don't turn estimates into commitments, but it's very hard for senior managers to break that habit. It's very hard for resources when estimating to not build in protection for the task. It's very hard to say my reputation depends on me saying I've got a 50-50 chance of coming in on time or not. They struggle with that. So we need to make sure they understand the logic behind all the problems with 90% estimates and all the behaviors that induces. And now we're moving that to 50-50. So we have to make sure that they are feeling secure. So the tendency, resources, so what we need to make sure is that the resources hear it directly from their superiors that it is okay to be late as long as they are on relay race work ethic or roadrunner work ethic and they are putting in their best efforts. That is really, really important. I actually have often got the CEO or the general manager to come down to the shop floor or into the work group and say, guys, it's okay as long as you're putting in the your right effort. We are able to intervene where we need to. These are not commitments. These are your best estimates. So go for it, and I'm fully supporting you. When you have that, you've removed a very major obstacle for implementing CCPM and being successful with it. Another thing is, though, getting those aggressive estimates. So normally what we say is just give us your typical estimate at 90% level, and then we can use software or do it manually and then drop it down to 50-50. If you're asking someone to do a 50-50 estimate, you've got to get them to provide, have a gut feel as if they're standing off the edge of a cliff, really saying, there's a good chance that I'm not going to deliver this in the time I've estimated. That's the only way you can do it. Now, one of the things I've discovered in some of these areas is that you get people who say, well, I'm giving you an aggressive estimate. It's 5 days. It's 5 days for this, and it's 5 days for that, and it's 10 days for this. There's a rounding effect in their estimates. They're not true estimates. It happened quite a lot in one company, but you have to challenge, is it really 5 days? Why is it not 3 days? If it's 10 days, why is it not 7 days? If they're all coming up with the same time intervals, you know that there is some repetition, some padding there, some protection. In this company here, we had a professor who was running a dual stream of experiments, and he was padding his estimates to allow him to do his own stream. So you've got to be careful of hidden agendas as well. You might not see that in many companies, but this was research and development, and people have to have high reputations in these places. So he wanted to go down a different path as well to check another path, but he didn't declare that, and then he finally did, and he admitted to it, and then we built a separate project for that. So we need to be clear what level of estimate we're using when creating the critical chain. Yeah. At task level, this is often difficult, and it can be a struggle for some. We're not used to it. We're asking them to think ahead. What we're saying is estimate how much duration is remaining, not what is complete, but what is remaining. And sometimes, so we've got to say, look, it's a guess, it's a guesstimate. You're the best person to estimate what's there. So just put it down, because buffer management, progress of the project, looking at the critical chain and the consumption in the critical chain depends on us reporting daily how much time duration is remaining. We need to know what is buffer penetration. So this is a fundamental element. Again, no punishment for missing the mark. So if they estimate 3 days remaining and it turns out to be 4, don't worry. What we can do, though, is say, well, I predicted 3, we got 4. What did I miss? So I can learn from that, and we get better as we go along. As I mentioned, buffer management and status reporting depends on the frequent updates of duration remaining for all tasks that are in work in progress. Now, if it's a long 2, 3, 4 year project, then you may not need to report progress daily if the tasks themselves are days, are weeks and weeks. So horses for courses. We need to make it appropriate. But I would start with daily to get the habit going. Watching time, very Daniel now right on 1 hour here. Do I stop and cut to Q&A, or just finish off and then we got Q&A?
No, we still have some time. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Okay, so here is another fascinating way that we can lose time. It's between handovers from one task to another task. So you need to have clarity on what is the exit criteria from one task to match the input criteria for the following task, the dependent task. So if the handover is not smooth and clean, you're going to lose time. And sometimes we can fall asleep at the wheel. We don't want Parkinson's law. Naturally, we don't want to be polishing because we finished early. We want early handovers. We need to be on that relay runner ethic as much as possible. It's amazing how much time can be lost between handovers. And often, depending if you're implementing CCPM in underneath another framework like Prince or whatever it's called, StageGate, often you have to have a meeting with the executive, and they could delay a project by days or weeks waiting for them to have a meeting about progress and what to do next. So we have to be aware of all of these things. They all chew into the buffer. So we need to be very, very careful. Now, one of the methods we use is we call it a countdown. So if you are the task nearing completion, you let the resources downstream know that you're getting close to being complete, and they can start getting ready to accept, getting prepared. So the handover, it's like a baton race, a relay race at the Olympics. So you're handing over the baton. They're already jogging, ready to accept. When you are, they're not standing still. They're already moving. So they're getting their desk clear, waiting to accept your handover. Couple of other things that are kind of a little bit in the psychology field. It's okay to be idle. We've been conditioned genetically now that being idle is waste. But as we see in the principles in CCPM and in TOC, idle is not necessarily bad. It's protective capacity. In CCPM, we want to avoid bad multitasking, so you don't start everything all at once. The dates in CCPM don't start until after the time. Okay, that's in planning. In execution, you may be able to pull forward. And you must also stop polishing, which is the Parkinson's law, handover to keep the project flowing and seek advice what to do next. That's all. That's all we ask for. And it's okay to not start everything as soon as possible. And it's not okay to delay handing over the task. This is what we call the unreported early finish. There's time loss. So there are many behaviors that we've eliminated by implementing CCPM. A lot of those are those Parkinson law, student syndrome, bad multitasking. CCPM takes care of a lot of that project risk. If you are working on the critical chain tasks, then everyone, even the bosses, must subordinate to your needs. It's a powerful place to be. But how do they know? Well, make yourself highly visible. Put an orange traffic cone on your desk or on your head. It doesn't matter. But everyone needs to know that you are performing a critical chain task. Do not disturb. And if you go to the kitchen to make yourself some tea or something else, someone should run up and say, "Come on, let me do that for you." Nice. Okay, and when you are in buffer management, do not play within the noise. Only inject corrective or preventive action if necessary. Do not micromanage. Playing within the noise amplifies the noise. If you go back to the early fathers in operations theory, they will tell you about that, Deming and others. So playing with the noise will amplify the noise. Often it will self-correct just through the resources that are involved at that stage of the project. An important thing is that we need to have an understanding of buffer management, about the difference between penetration in a feeding buffer and the project buffer. The project buffer is always priority, except for when a feeding buffer is now busted, and it's now causing penetration into the project buffer. And that helps allocate priorities between resources and what to do and what not to do. We always try to implement both corrective and preventive measures and predict the impact on buffers. So we are learning about the project environment. So next time around, we can anticipate and build that into the project network, or build a template or a plugin to that template that will deal with those sorts of situations. We use Exapron. I'm not here to promote a particular software tool, but Exapron for me has done real wonders with implementation. It's removed a number of obstacles for clients for adopting CCPM. It's very rich with features and very useful features. Buffer management, which is important. You'll see in other software they use fever charts. Exapron uses the early warning combined with a standard buffer chart, and that is more than sufficient to keep a project knowing how much time you have left. You can have a risk quotient, which tells you what's the likelihood, how risky is this project, how much buffer is already consumed, and as you in planning and also in execution. So Exapron is very, very quick to set up, and now they even have a sandbox where you can play around. You don't even have to set up an account. Finally, in my experience, I've come across what we call corporate psychopaths. This is Ellie Goldratt's term for people who will disrupt, will play along up to a certain point and then throw the whole system out if they had the chance. And why? It's because they've got something to lose, a power or influence that they used to have. Now that everything is exposed and made visible, their game might be showing up. So when you are an implementer, you are actually testing and looking for where that could possibly be. And if you encounter that at such a level, for me, I say you guys are not ready to take on this project, and I refuse to take it on if there are deliberate people who would deliberately undermine. Until their heads change in favor, I would not take on the project because it would be disruptive to their own company. So exposure through heightened visibility could be seen as a threat, and it's not necessarily easy to detect, and I've fallen into traps. A couple of examples. So a person, the one that had the argument with this other consultant, he was very focused on his PhD research and his international reputation, and wanted to be assured that none of this would be compromised by implementing CCPM. And this other consultant, who is not a CCPM consultant, but had done some CCPM, ended up with an argument for him. So he blamed CCPM and resisted. In the same organization, someone was able to use contracts, legal contracts, and penalties for not fulfilling delivery on time by stealing, cannibalizing resources from other departments whenever their project started to run late. So they were able to get away with that until CCPM came along and exposed what was actually going on. And this is why there was a lot of stress in the organization. That person that was very, very supportive of CCPM, when she discovered that this is going to happen, she then put in serious resistance. So these are kind of situations you can find yourself in. So final comment, Exapron removes many, many obstacles for rapid, successful implementation. Hopefully I conveyed a little bit of that. It is very comprehensive, easy to learn steps and features. It stays true to CCPM principles with all those enhanced features for flexibility in both single and multi-project portfolio management. It's a significant asset to an implementer, to a CCPM implementer for myself. It streamlines the process with what we call concurrent practice. It's learning by doing. So gone are the days of post-it notes all over the place, and then you're having to convert those into a critical chain with identifying the resources and the durations. Automating all of that is so fast with Exapron, and no doubt with other software as well. But being cloud-based, it's quick to set up. You can take it anywhere. You can look at it on your iPhone or a smartphone, anywhere. So, sorry, that was a hose pipe of information thrown at you guys. Hand over to you, any questions, and I'll attempt to answer. Daniel? Hello?
Hello?
Daniel, you there?
Yeah,
Can you hear me,
here.
Daniel?
Sorry, I muted myself. Sorry.
Okay. So I'm handing over to Q&A. If people have questions,
Yes.
go over anything. Yeah.
Jóvenes, si tienen alguna pregunta pueden hacerla directamente en inglés o si necesitan traducción me avisan. Sus micrófonos están abiertos. Creo que están abiertos.
Gracias, Daniel. Soy Raciel, buenas tardes. Hello, Mark. Sorry, Andrew. Hello.
Hello.
Me quedó totalmente claro, la verdad agradezco primero el tiempo que nos están brindando para esta sesión. La verdad muy aprovechable para los que estuvimos presentes.
Okay.
Daniel, thank you very much, Andrew.
Andrew, Raciel is saying that he was, although we did a quick, you were going fast, it was very clear and easy to understand, and that he appreciates your time and that we are giving them this session.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm sorry it was a little bit fast. There's a lot of content. I'm happy that you got some value from this.
¿Alguien más tiene alguna pregunta? ¿Puede escribirla si no tiene el micrófono? Andrew, I just have like a quick question.
Yes.
From the beginning, you show us implementations on a board with Post-its and then with Exapron. So
Yes.
what do you see like, so future implementations, you already have like a template for you as an implementer to do your implementations?
I have a generic, so with CCPM, you have fairly generic injections that you must do, and we basically build a project network. So each implementation has its own project network, if you like. So what are the necessary things? So you plug into that the any negative branches that you discover in the process, going through the layers of resistance, and any of the intermediate obstacles that come up, intermediate objectives that come up if they raise obstacles. There is a general standard, and then the rest fits around there.
Okay.
So there is something for that. And the last couple I haven't used that, but in earlier days, and I have somewhere I have that now. I'm thinking where I keep it in my files, but I haven't used it for the last 2 implementations because it's been fairly quick. It's been so quick, but it is important to have that. But also because I've done so many, I know this in my head.
Okay.
But question is valid, and if I can find it, I can send you.
Okay. It's just that just a question, and maybe it can help them during their own implementations, and they can take a look at, because many of them are beginning to do changes in their own project environment.
Yes.
And when we saw that you have like a 2-week implementation, rapid implementation, that's really surprising.
Oh, okay. For me, it's one of the things as a TOC practitioner is if you try to help others go faster, why can't you help yourself go faster?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, I'm really happy if there's a lot to digest there, maybe. So if anyone goes away and thinks about a question and they want to have an answer to that question, I'm happy. You can send me that through email and I will endeavor to answer that. If you want further examples of case studies, I'm happy to send further information on other projects, not necessarily mine, from other areas, from other people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned also on the email that I can share the PDF of the presentation?
Yes. If you can do that, do so. I tried to send that as through before, but the size would not allow me to email. So if you can convert that to PDF, then everyone can have that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In there, Daniel, I keep saying Danilo. I've been speaking with Danilo a lot lately on TOCFE. In there is another case study which I did not use, and it's by Dr. Alex Klarman on the Euro 2012 football tournament and the preparations leading into that for infrastructure projects in a city in Poland. So when you get the slide deck, unhide those slides.
Okay.
That is, for me, one of the most remarkable case studies using CCPM.
Okay, great. I will share with them. Okay.
Yes, and click on the YouTube link as well. There's a short video.
Okay.
Which is funny.
Okay. So anybody else has one more question? Juan Carlos or Rafael or Andrew, any questions?
Yo otra vez, mi estimado Daniel.
Adelante.
Bueno, si me pudieras ayudar nada más con la pronunciación, me gustaría saber si tuviera un caso palpable de una empresa, ya sabes, con cultura 100% mexicana, que no sea tanto transnacional, que haya tenido éxito con la implementación del Critical Chain a través del uso de Exepron.
They're asking Andrew if you're aware of any implementation on a Mexican company.
Yes.
Because to them it seems like they are international companies. Entonces, como comentario rápido, para eso son implementaciones también locales, pues en Australia y Nueva Zelanda. Pero le hago la pregunta. So, Andrew, are you aware of any Mexican implementation with Exepron or CCPM?
Not directly, but it's very easy to find out.
Dice que no directamente, pero puede fácilmente conectarlo. I know Rolando Di Silvio did some implementations in Mexico City. Hay un consultor que se llama Rolando Di Silvio que tiene implementaciones en México también.
So who you can Daniel Perelman could be a contact on that.
Daniel what?
Perelman. He's an Exepron guy, affiliate with Exepron. He's in Mexico somewhere.
Okay.
¿De qué empresa es él?
Es un consultor de Exepron también. Para en México.
So I know somebody from Mexico who's CCPM specialist, and I think they are definitely using Exepron. So I can write to him and put you both in touch.
Okay, that would be great.
Actually, I didn't think about that before. Of course. He's a really nice guy too.
Okay, so we'll look for him then, and if you can get us in contact, that would be great. I'll share the link with the group.
Yep.
Perfecto. Entonces buscaremos contactos extras de Exepron y los puedo poner en contacto con las empresas que sé que han usado CCPM.
Perfecto.
Muy bien. So, Andrew.
Yeah.
Por mi parte sería todo, Daniel, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Perfecto.
Okay, no problem.
So thank you so much. We're gonna quit the presentation. We have to finish it. So.